After about 70 odd quiet years since the beast, it seems, was thrown into the fiery pit, we've had it good. But I digress. Today we are going to be dealing with Revelations and the 1,000-year reign in Revelation chapter 20, and the Son of God makes war, Revelations 19, and the Battle of Armageddon, the Battle of Gog and Magog, and the Great White Throne Judgment of 2011. According to typical churchy yore, care of John Nelson Darby and Cyrus Schofield, the millennial reign is supposedly the 1,000-year reign of Christ when he comes back down to earth after he appears again with the newly raptured and selected saved ones a few years after the tribulation, and he brings them down with him. He supposedly comes to a reinstated and accepting nation of Israel, where he reigns from a newly built temple replete with animal sacrifices. I'm sorry, I have to call that out as unscriptural, sacrilegious bunkum. This is the early extent of the Darby's literal 1,000-year fairy tale that now sees a more than 2,000-year gap in Daniel's straightforward prophecy of the 70 weeks. So now, according to that myth, we find another 1,000 years tacked on the end of that, where we are supposed to believe that we Christians will be raptured, enjoy the marriage supper of the Lamb with new glorified bodies, then come back down with Christ to live and reign on thrones with him for 1,000 years. At the end of all of that, there is a battle of Armageddon, complete with modern weapons of war, with tanks and nukes, etc., as well as 200 million riders on horseback. That's a lot of riders. When that battle is over, the believers then go back up to heaven in a second and final rapture that's also not mentioned in Scripture. The funny thing is that it's not the Battle of Armageddon at this juncture anyway. It's the Battle of Gog and Magog, which is very much a one-sided spiritual battle in which the Lamb finally casts that old devil into the lake of fire. And it has nothing to do with us at all as believers. That might be all very confusing, I know. So for a start, we need to understand that Revelations is a cryptic allegory, where most of the timing is not literal, even though some of the numbering is. So 1,000 years of time in figurative language simply means a long age. The Bible even says that a day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. And there are many instances in the Bible where 1,000 is not literal. So, as for this millennium we are all supposed to be waiting for, guess what? We are already in it. And along with many believers who have come and gone, just like them, we are already reigning as kings and priests unto our God. And it has actually turned out to be twice as long as 1,000 years so far. This millennium, in parenthesis, is also the time when the Lamb rules the nations with an iron rod, and he also wars against them. Revelations 19:11. Isn't it comforting, though, to know that it is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords himself who's in control of the nations? We've just got to fight our own spiritual fight, leading with the sword of the Spirit, but that's another subject, isn't it? After this millennial church age, the rebellious Christ-hating peoples and nations are finally headed up by Satan, and I have to say that feels like it's about to happen right now, as far as I can tell. After about 70 odd quiet years since the beast, it seems, was thrown into the fiery pit, we've had it good. But I digress. So Satan gets loose for a time to stir up the world against the Lamb. He, the Lamb, will finally go to war from on high and defeat them by serving them with the fire of the wrath of God. And Satan finally gets thrown into the lake of fire where the false prophet and the beast already are. This is after the final ascent to heaven of the faithful to the marriage supper of the Lamb we read about in Revelations 19. This is where they will remain in heavenly glory forever with the Lord. I'll say it again, forever and ever. They're not coming back down to earth. So we get to be taken to glory and escape the fiery wrath of God, it seems. And that sounds pretty good to me. So in explaining all that, we've seen that cryptic language is used to describe the time of the millennial reign. As I just mentioned about the beast being dealt with first, I'll clear that up. At the end of Revelation 19, or at the end of the millennial reign, before or when Satan is released, the beast and the false prophet are figuratively thrown into the lake of fire. This is because they are a system of spiritual powers but not beings. So they have already been taken out of the way to destruction forever. It is then we discover there is now a new evil one coming. We find this in Revelation chapter 20, where we found that the millennium begins with that dragon Satan being thrown into the place called the abyss. And he's thrown there for what's said to be 1,000 years, which we know means a long age, as we just saw. This continuous locking up means simply prevention of him being able to deceive the nations into waging any full-blown war against the Lamb for as long as the millennium lasts. The Lamb rules and wars with a rod of iron over those very nations. And that's where we are in time now. This age will end for believers with that marriage supper of the Lamb, in heaven. Praise be to God for that. In the meantime, even though Satan still has some power and goes about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, as the Bible says, this ruling and reigning with Christ has allowed Christianity to flourish during this millennial church age we are now in. Ephesians 6 and other scriptures show we are in a spiritual war with Satan's henchmen. And sometimes that war becomes physical and Christians become persecuted, disparaged, and even martyred at times. Christians operate their ruling and reigning power, though, through prayer. Mainly praying in tongues, in the Spirit, which gets the right prayers happening. Believers can also be peaceful activists against the beast, yet they should obey the ruling powers or the government, so they can indeed go to war in the services of their respective countries and also follow legal mandates that don't require denying Christ or God. We shouldn't commit treason against our fellow brethren either. That means no dobbing in Australia. That happened sometimes in the past where Christians have dobbed in fellow Christians. It's Christ himself that's keeping this world going, which probably explains why we are not already fried to a crisp in a nuclear war or destroyed by a passing asteroid or something. Christ also makes war against the beast and the false prophet during this millennium and defeats them whenever he does. It's a bit like whack-a-mole. He whacks them down here and whacks them down there, and he keeps them down, even though they keep trying. They're trying to fight we the Christians. So Christ also makes war against the beast and the false prophet. If we think this age is bad, though, it's a Caribbean cruise compared to what's coming. So Christ completely defeats them in the end. And at the end of the age, after the beast and the false prophet are gone to perdition, Satan is to be released for a little time to actually make war with the Lamb himself. This will end up with Satan and all his power, just like the remaining beast and false prophet system were. He will be thrown into the lake of fire to burn forever. However, we Christians will be in heaven by then. It appears we get taken up when the beast and false prophet are taken out of the way, and then Satan is released. Or just before or soon after. But we do get taken out of the way. Who really knows, because we know not the day nor the hour of any of this. We just have the clues about where we will be when what happens. And we will be in heaven. Again, in cryptic allegorical language, we can see that believers and others, some of whom will be martyred during this period of 2,000 years or more, are really ruling and reigning with Christ as people get born, live their lives for better or for worse, and die. I should explain that means as believers get born, live their lives for better or for worse, and die. The physical death during the millennium now is called experiencing the first death in Revelations. And all that martyring will not stop until the end either. At the time of people's deaths, they will have to wait to be brought back to life in heaven in the first resurrection. But in the believer's case, of course, they will not experience the second death to come, which is reserved for unsaved sinners to be cast into the lake of fire. Chapter 21, verse 6. However, and of course, some future ones will indeed only experience the rapture, which, although it's not stated, is translation straight to heaven, straight through the ceiling, as my mum said. And blessed are they, as the text says. This is the hope we have as believers. Those who share in the first resurrection are those blessed and holy ones who ruled and reigned with Christ during the reign of the long age. Revelations 20 verse 6. Note, many believe that when we die with the first death, we will be given temporary spiritual bodies to abide in while we wait in heaven. This is most likely, and it is predicated by those martyrs who are told of in Revelations as crying out to God for retribution. They are alive in heaven and able to talk to he who sits on the throne there. Also, according to the story of Lazarus shared by Jesus himself. Unsaved sinners who die will go to Hades and be able to see into heaven. But no matter how they try, they will be completely unable to go there forever. For those, the second death in the lake of fire that burns forever and ever is what awaits them. That's all the Bible has to say about the millennium. The just mentioned millennial battle of the Son of God, which is instigated by Jesus himself in chapter 19:11, results in much spiritual blood being spilled by the armies of heaven, so that many souls can be saved during that time. And also there is coming a time when the second beast and his false prophet are to be thrown into that lake of fire. It is only some unknown time after that Satan himself is released upon the earth. So could there be a great harvest of souls in the interim? We can only pray that that is so. Chapter 16. Before Satan is chained up for the duration of the millennium, he, together with the first beast and the false prophet, gather the nations of the world together against the Lamb. That's the existing world of Rome, basically. He gathers the nations against the Lamb, and the natural but mostly spiritual battle of Armageddon takes place. This begins with the battle of Kokba, in the natural sense, when both the Judean and Roman army almost destroy each other in a battle of attrition in 135 CE. But there is also a spiritual battle where the first beast is gotten rid of, and the second beast and the false prophet come in. The end result of this is the fall and destruction of Rome and the Roman Empire beast system, which is Babylon the Great Beast. Around this time the Lamb wins his first battle, and Satan is seized and chained up in the abyss. Not yet into the lake of fire, of course. He's not destroyed yet, he's just in the abyss. Chapter 16, 18 to 21, covers the destruction of the first Babylon the Great, which is the Roman Empire. Chapter 18 is much more expansive, and it describes a massive empire, which would have to be the world global government finally coming down. It is being destroyed in a single day, being burnt by fire. It is here we might be seeing a nuclear exchange on the earth. In fact, in verse 17 it is said that this destruction takes place in a single hour. And that could very well happen right at this moment in time. Only Christ is stopping it. He is in the way until he takes himself out of the way. It isn't known whether Christians will still be living on the earth during this time, but it is comforting to know that immediately after this, in chapter 19, comes the first mention of the marriage supper of the Lamb. So it is likely that we will be gone up to be with the Lord. And this will be the beginning of the final outpouring of the wrath of God's winepress. Thank you for listening. So Christ completely defeats them in the end. And at the end of the age, after the beast and the false prophet are gone to perdition, Satan is to be released for a little time to actually make war with the Lamb himself.